Welcome to a video from Initialising.com. This is the second in a course of tutorials on programming analog synths. In the first part, I looked at using a Jen SX1000 and a classic 1978 budget mono synth to show the basic principles of analog synthesis, the oscillators, the filters, and the envelopes. For the next video, I'm moving up to here with Korg Minilogue, which is a 2016 Polyphonic analog synthesizer. So it's proper analog, it's not virtual analog. It's got 4 voices, so it means you can play 4 at a time. And again, it's quite simple, a bit like the Jen, it's quite simple, but it's got some nice touches to it, so you can make some quite sophisticated sounds. So in this video, I'm going to again show you a bit about the oscillators and the filters, but we're looking at it from the polysynth style. And we've got dual oscillators, so what can we do with dual oscillators? So I'm going to look at the dual oscillators and look at the filters, the envelopes, and a bit of modulation as well. So this isn't really a tutorial specifically about the Minilogue, it's about any analog synth, any poly analog synth. It's just some of the things that I'll be able to show you can do here on the Minilogue, some other synths can't do. There's lots of things this can't do as well, but you'll get the idea. It's that tutorial on analog synthesis. So I'm going to switch to an initialized program. So I've got a basic sound in there. I'll show you the layout of the Minilogue. So if you watch the previous video, you can compare it with that. And if you're looking at your own synth, you can see. So we've got 2 oscillators there that produce the sound, and we can do 4 at once. We've got 4-note polyphony. The 5th one, it'll steal from the bottom and take away one of those notes. We've got 2. We've got different shapes for them, which we'll have a look at as well. We've got a mixer here. There's a filter. And then you've got an envelope for the amplifier, and an envelope for the filter, which, like the Jen, has also got a separate filter for the filter, which is really good. And then we've got some modulation options on there. There's also a delay on this, but I won't mention that because it's not really part of the analog signal chain for everything else. We have got some different modes on those. I will mention those as well, just because your synth may have that as well if you're trying this on a poly synth. So we've got a couple of different modes. We've got poly mode, which we're in now, duo mode, which gives you 2-note polyphony. So you hear 2, but you hear that sort of phasing sound, and that's because it's playing of the 4 oscillators this has got, 2 are playing at the same time. And then you've got a depth thing there, you can detune them in. The Unison mode is the 4 of the notes. Also 4 notes at the same time. And then the detune. We've got a mono mode to make it like a mono synth. And then these are some extra things that we could have: chord modes, delay, Arpeggiator, which Arpeggiator, I'll do a separate video on that one. So let's go into poly mode for now. We can hear we've got an oscillator. I've got a mixer here. I turn these all to 0. We shouldn't hear anything. We have got a noise section. Lots of synths have got the noise, and there you can hear the noise. Oscillator 1, oscillator 2. So let's have a look what we can do with oscillators. So here on the oscillator section, we've got a selector for the type of oscillator shape. If you remember back to the Jen video, on the Jen we had pulse width, sawtooth, and a triangle. So on here we've got the sawtooth. Let's bring that in. Triangle. In fact, if you remember back to the Jen video, that had sawtooth, square wave, and pulse width. On this one, we've got sawtooth, a triangle, and a square wave. Now, what's nice about this particular synth, you've got some modifications for it as well. The shape, and you can see it on the display there. So that is pulse width, because we're in square and we've got pulse width there. On this particular synth, on many you can't adjust the sawtooth and the triangle wave shapes, but on this one you can. You can hear that. So that's actually a nice thing about the Minilogue, but that traditional square is the one and we want to modify that so we can make some changes, and we can use an LFO like we did on the Jen mono synth. Now the other thing we've got here is pitch, which means we can adjust the pitch of the VCO, which is handy because we've got two, so we can do two different things. So let's bring the other one in. Again, we've got two waveforms, exactly the same thing. We can adjust the octave. Some synths say there's 32, 16, 8, 4, which is the pipe lengths. On the Jen, that's how they were. And we can adjust this pitch now. So let's bring two together. So you're now hearing two sawtooths. See it on there? And if we adjust the pitch, we get a detuning. So if we put it a little bit off, we get that sort of phasing effect, which is always really nice, as well as the shape control. So there's our two together. So these are the modulation options, and sync is one of the classic things you do on an analog synth. So that's just the pitch. If I adjust the pitch, you can hear they're just totally independent. If I throw the sync on, which keeps the two oscillators, their cycle starts at the same time. So if you adjust the pitch, you start to get some really interesting sound. Especially if I turn on oscillator 1, so you only hear oscillator 2. That's always a great effect. That's a sync effect. We can use some of the modulation options, and one of the classic things to do is use the pitch envelope to do that, but we'll have a look at that shortly. The other thing we've got on here as well is a bit of ring modulation. Get to sort of 60s Doctor Who effect. So the more supple you get it, so you get some interesting sort of musical effects, and the more you make those oscillators apart, the more ring sound you get, and the more sort of almost the distortion, digital sound to it. And you can combine them on this synth as well. The other thing we've got on here is a cross modulation, which is a bit like FM, not quite. So we can modify one oscillator with the other. So let's turn that on. So into the almost sort of bell-like, and FM frequency modulation is what DX7 uses, or a form of that, to produce sort of those nice bell sounds. Here on the Minilogue, you're not getting very clean sounds, but you can hear that. You can make it more subtle and just add those overtones to it. So turn it right down. So let's bring both oscillators together. And then bring that cross in. It's a bit more subtle. And of course, depending on, you can have other things like changing the waves. So there, if I just go to square waves, or triangle is probably quite a good example. So yeah, it's clean. You hear that frequency modulation. So quite a few synths have that effect as well. So that's our oscillator section. So let's look at the mixer. You see me using that. So let's go back to get a nice sawtooth on there. We'll have no modulation. We'll leave that at 0. Everything's switched to 0. So there's our simple brass sound. So I'll just turn oscillator 2 down for now. Then it passes through the filter. And you've got manual control for that filter. So just like it did on the analog mono synth, it has effectively it's a low pass filter, so it only lets low through and chops out the high pass. So if it's fully open, it lets everything through, and we can subtle it, and you can see from the waveform, you can get nice and subtle with it. So you've got the 2-pole and 4-pole option there. And it's really about the slopes so at the top and the bottom are kind of pretty much the same. It's about that curve, how it applies it. And I sometimes find you get a bit of a brighter sound on a 2-pole. And the resonance, so the resonant takes the high peak and amplifies it until you can get some squidgy sort of sounds when you have the filter turned down. And then as you get higher up, it gets into self-oscillation. Which you can actually tune to make it musical as an extra sort of waveform. Now if we go to the 4-pole model, you can hear a bit of difference there. You hear that bass. Let's put a low note on there. I turn that resonant off. You still actually got the bass there. Some synths you'll lose that bottom end as you put the resonance up. We've got a couple of options. We've got key tracking on and off. So when key tracking is on, and we've got we've got off 50% and 100% on this synth. So what that should do, turn the resonance down, off, the filter is controlled the same brightness top and the bottom. At 100% we should hear the brightness much higher when we're at the top, and 50% it's not quite as effective. The idea behind that is emulating a traditional instrument. You want the higher frequencies as you get up the keyboard, and that's what key tracking does. So if you want your lows to be not as bright and then your highs to be brighter, then key tracking affects that cutoff. Effectively like you moving the cutoff as you're going through, you move it up and down the keyboard. This synth has also got velocity, which not all synths do. The idea behind that, and again we've got off 50%, 100%. So you can adjust that velocity with some, you can adjust that filter cutoff with some velocity. Not all synths have that as well. Now this goes on to the next part where we've got these envelopes, and we've got 2 envelopes. One's for the amplifier and one's for the filter. So let's just look at the amplifier one. I'm going to open the filter right up. You can hear that. And we've got the filters here. So if I increase the attack, you get a slower attack sound. You hear the sound fading up. So we've got ADSR, just as we did on the Jen. Some things like the DX7 and the Korg DW8000 and other synths have got much more complex envelopes. Something like the ModWave and Multipoly, they actually have the ADSR the same way as well. So you've got 4 controls. You've got attack, the decay. So what the decay takes you back down again to what level? That's the sustain level. So this is your speeded decay. And then release is the amount of time you can hear it once you take your key off. So if I have that 0, you get that sort of dead. So if I want to make a pluck sound, I can go with no attack, sharp decay, very little sustain, like that. If I had to release, I get that kind of effect. If I put the sustain right up, you get the sort of constant effect, and I can make a string type sound by increasing that attack and put some release. So that's the envelope of the amp. If I'm just going to open that back up, so we've got it back to basics again. We've also got one for the filter, like we did on the Jen. Not all synths have a separate filter, and it is one of my favorite things when you're playing with filters. Not all synths have a separate amp, a separate envelope for the filter, because it allows you to do things like this. So I've turned that filter down, and here we've got the EG in it. So this is the amount of envelope we apply to this filter. So with it down and the filter down, I hear nothing. If I make this filter very short attack, short decay, no sustain, no release, and then I bring this in, you'll hear it because that's up. Now it's very similar to the amp one. You think, oh, why do I need two? Because you can do some interesting things with it when you do two, especially if I go the opposite way around and I open the filter up a bit. So now you can hear it sort of gets brighter, then goes back quieter again. And if I put with this some resonance, you can straight away, you got like sort of classic synth sound. Now, without the envelope for the filter, I wouldn't be able to get that effect. And as you can see, as I increase that attack, you can hear the effect as it. So I could have the amplifier amplifying with a nice sort of strong attack and a bit of release, but the filter comes in a bit slow, so you get that faded in effect. So you can hear it at that level, and then it sort of comes in. We could have it brighten, go down a bit, and then a bit of release. I've only got 4-note polyphony. I forget. I play massive chords, and I've got the resonance. And with the different poles on, you'll hear the different. The envelope has more of an impact. So that's why I like the filter envelope. You can do all sorts of interesting things with it. And that's, of course, one of the great things about having a synth like this with the controls. You can make those and play them. And of course, with it being a modern one, I can save that, store them in library and so on. So, right, let's have a look at the LFOs now. So LFO is low frequency oscillator. So it's another oscillator, but you don't use it as audio. You use this to modulate some of the other things we've got there. This synth's got a triangle, sawtooth, and a square option. We've got some other modulation controls, so in a second. We've got the speed of it and how much impact it has, and then your destination. So let's go with pitch for now. That's probably one we can hear. Let's so I'm going to set my EG, the filter envelope, to 0, so that, because I should have mentioned earlier on, actually, this has a negative value, so you can have an upside down envelope, because you can go into the negative, so you can have a bright envelope that's controlled by this as well. So back to normal now. I've got my destination for the LFO as pitch. I'm going to put the rate up a minute, and then let's turn the value that we send across to it. So we can send loads, or we can send a little bit. So we've got these waves. So triangle will give us a small traditional one. If we bring it down, so you can hear that. So this little switch here is quite interesting. This is EG mod. So this uses the envelope to affect these controls. So currently we've got the LFO going to pitch. And turn it off. You can hear that pitch being affected. If I change it to rate, this envelope will change the speed of the LFO, change that value. So is it's going to go faster and slow down and stay at a constant level? That's rate. Intensity, int is intensity. So again, I got it quite high, but let's settle it down a bit. So it's nice now, you can apply that LFO to come in with a bit of delay because I've got the attack on it. So it's a quite nice effect that. Not all synths have got that. When you come to the modern synths, you can do a lot of stuff like this on the multi-poly, but not all synths have got that as well. So we've been looking at affecting pitch. I'm just going to turn it off for a sec. Let's affect the cutoff. So it's basically like the LFO is now adjusting that for us. Some LFOs have got sample and hold, which gives you sort of that random effect that you get like 70s sci-fi and stuff, but this doesn't have that. So we can have a lot of modulation, and we can and if we slow it right down, you get some nice effects with it like that. Now, one thing you'll notice, even though it's slowing down, it's that nice gradual slow open close filter. When I press the keys like that, it actually is restarting the LFO, and that's actually one of the things that's buried on this in the menus on here, which is this LFO sync. So one of the options we've got is beat per minute. So quite a lot of synths have got that, especially modern ones. You can actually sync the LFO to a tempo sync, which is always really really handy. Get some nice effects on that. And another one we've got on there is key sync on or off. So if I turn that off, the LFO doesn't re-trigger when I press the keys down, which means you can get that kind of a that's always a nice effect. And the voice sync one is, what that does is that one syncs all the 4 oscillators together. The LFO, if I do it independently, like each one has got its own LFO. You probably hear if I turn the speed up a bit. So now they're in sync, now they're not. So that's just another handy thing. Again, different synths have this in different places. Cutoff's always great for that though. Now, another interesting one that this synth has is shape. So that adjusts the shape. So this is where we can do our, if we've got into a triangle, to a square wave, this is where we can do our pulse width modulation. So there's our square wave. And let's slow this down a bit and send some value. There you can hear that LFO that on the shape. And don't forget we've got that sync off. If I turn it back on, it always restarts, but if you leave it off, it doesn't. that's always a really nice effect. And of course, what you can do with this is I can have the same. I've got two oscillators. Let's just put the other one on its own. But I can adjust the shape of this one to be a different position to that one, and then bring them together. Forget that. Of course, one nice thing I can do with this as well is I could bring the other oscillator on and put a different waveform and combine them. So that's the shape. And the other thing we should already talk, we've done pitch. The other thing you can do, we talked about pitch earlier on. There's the pitch. So this is where the oscillator is affected by the envelope. So let's just turn all our mods off for now. So, right, let's have that pitch affected by the envelope. Let's go to just have this oscillator. Notice it only affects oscillator 2 in this case, which is what I want. Some synths allow you to like have a separate envelope for pitch envelope and allow you to pick which oscillator you want. I think the Prophet 5 does that one. Or if at least it doesn't have its own envelope, there's a switch to send it to one of the oscillators, and that's how you create the sync sound. So I mentioned early on about you can sync them together. So what if we do that weird pitch modulation like that, but sync them? And there you go, that's that classic. And we can be more subtle. And that's just with that. So that is staying at fixed. If I just show you oscillator on its own. And I can have both on. But there's your classic sync, that's how you do it. Now some synths as well, like the LFO, we can send it to the pitch, but it sends it to both at the same time. If you could select a particular oscillator to send it to, you can do that syncing sound with LFO and have one constant and one going up and down. If I put this pitch envelope back, see, you can't do that on here because they're in sync. And it sends to both of them. You don't get that effect. You get some interesting effects. It would actually be really nice if you could just send that that pitch to if it had an oscillator 1 and oscillator 2, but it doesn't have it on there. So that's the basic sections of a polysynth like the Korg Minilogue. We've been able to create some sync sounds, we can create some filter sweep. In the next video, I'm going to spend a bit more time on how we can use these modulations to create some more interesting sound. I will create the classic sounds on there, some with the filter and the sync sounds and everything else. So we'll look at that in the next video. I just wanted to go through all the sections here on a traditional, not traditional, but on a pretty classic laid out synth like the Korg Minilogue. The next one, I'll come back and we'll have another one on the Minilogue and look at some and make some more interesting sounds with it. And then I'm probably going to go to a different direction and we'll look at a hybrid synth from the 80s, wavetable synths, and how you can program those. So it's completely different to this, but it's got a very similar characteristics with the filters and the envelopes. So yeah, check that out. If you like these series of videos on back to basics with on programming analog synths, please let me know. If there's any synths you'd like me to feature or techniques you'd like to feature, just leave a comment and I'll take a look at it. Thanks for watching.